In 1822, deep in the wooded hills of Virginia, there stood a house that carried whispers rather than welcomes. The Whitaker family lived there, a family that most folks in town spoke of only in hushed tones. Their 3 daughters were beautiful, pale as the moon, and haunting in their silence. But one by one, they disappeared. Gone without a trace. Some said the woods took them. Others said their own family did. Tonight, we step into the shadows of their home and uncover the darkness buried in the Whitaker name. Before we walk deeper into this chilling tale, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because more stories like this, of families with secrets too dark to stay buried, are waiting, and trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. The year was 1822, and Hollow Creek, Virginia, was the sort of place that appeared ordinary at first glance. A handful of dusty roads stretched between farmland and woods. Horses and wagons clattered through town, and neighbors often lingered on porches to exchange gossip. From the outside, it seemed like a quiet little world untouched by anything sinister. But everyone in Hollow Creek knew there was one house that broke the illusion of safety. A house no one wanted to speak of too loudly. It was the Whitaker house. The Whitaker home stood at the edge of the forest, its white boards weathered and its black shutters like narrowed eyes peering down on travelers. It was not ruined, not abandoned, and yet something about it unsettled everyone who passed by. It seemed to breathe with the woods themselves, watching, waiting, whispering. Behind the house, stretching far into the trees, lay an orchard. Long rows of apple trees grew in unnatural order, their branches bending low with fruit every fall. The apples were crimson, brighter than any grown in nearby farms, and they glistened as though wet with dew even on the driest days. Yet no one in town had ever bought them. No one in town had ever been offered one. The Whitakers kept to themselves. Mr. Whitaker was a tall, gaunt man with a face carved in stern lines. His eyes were so dark they seemed almost black, and when they fell on someone, it felt as though he was measuring their soul. He worked the land quietly but fiercely, and though he had money to keep his home well maintained, no one ever saw him selling, buying, or trading like the other farmers. His wife was a fragile-looking woman. Pale, thin, her lips pressed tightly together. She seemed always on the verge of speaking but never did. She walked through town as though she was half asleep, her hands folded at her waist, her gaze fixed on the ground. Some whispered she had been sickly for years. Others said she carried the burden of secrets too heavy for one woman alone. And then there were the daughters. Anna, 16. Margaret, 14. Eliza, 12. 3 young girls who should have been lively, giggling, chasing each other in the fields. But they were not like other children. They were beautiful. Yes, too beautiful. Their skin was pale as ivory, their hair dark and glossy, their eyes so piercingly blue they seemed almost unnatural. They walked in perfect step with one another, often moving in silence, speaking only when absolutely necessary. And when they did speak, their words were quiet, deliberate, as though every syllable was chosen with caution. People whispered that the Whitaker daughters were strange. Too strange. Some children swore they saw the girls standing in the orchard at night, their white dresses glowing in the moonlight, their hands clasped together as they whispered to the trees. Others said the girls sang strange songs down by the river, their voices carrying eerily through the mist. But whenever an adult went to investigate, there was nothing, just the wind in the branches, just the water rushing past. Still, the rumors spread, because Hollow Creek was a town that trusted its whispers more than its truths. The first true sign of danger came when a man went missing. Robert Grady was a traveling salesman, a cheerful sort who made his way from town to town selling buttons, fabrics, and tools. He was last seen heading toward the Whitaker property one autumn evening, saying he hoped to ask for a meal and shelter before continuing south. His horse was later found tied to a tree along the road. His wagon sat abandoned, its goods untouched. Robert Grady himself was never seen again. People wondered if highwaymen had taken him, but nothing was stolen. Others suggested he had simply left behind his life. But there were a very few, who whispered that they had seen him that night. They said he had been walking between the apple trees in the Whitaker orchard, with the 3 daughters trailing behind him. The Whitakers denied any knowledge of the man, and no one pressed them further. But unease crept deeper into Hollow Creek. Nights seemed darker, the silence heavier. Farmers swore they heard laughter echoing faintly from the woods at midnight, laughter too sharp and too sweet to be natural. Some swore they saw lights bobbing between the apple trees, lanterns carried by invisible hands. And children whispered of shadows moving just beyond the edge of the orchard, shapes that were tall and thin and watching. Among the children of Hollow Creek, there was one boy who was braver, or more foolish, than the rest. Thomas Green, no more than 13 years old, declared to his friends that he would sneak into the Whitaker orchard and see what was truly hidden there. His friends dared him, and so one night, Thomas slipped away with nothing but a lantern and his reckless courage. He never came home. His parents searched the woods for days. His friends swore they heard him cry out once in the distance, and then nothing. His lantern was found broken at the edge of the orchard. But Thomas Green was gone, as if the earth itself had swallowed him. The town grew quieter after that. Doors were locked earlier. Children were called inside before the sun fully set. And when people spoke of the Whitakers, they did so in whispers, as though the family might hear them from across the fields. But the Whitakers themselves? They came to church as usual the following Sunday. Mr. Whitaker sat tall and stern in the back pew. His wife sat beside him, her eyes lowered, her hands folded. The daughters sat in a row, their dresses clean, their faces expressionless. They bowed their heads during prayer. They sang the hymns in voices that were soft but strangely haunting. Not once did they mention Thomas Green. Not once did sorrow cross their faces. And when the service ended, the family walked home together, silent as always, their feet perfectly in step. It was after Thomas's disappearance that people began to notice more unsettling details about the Whitaker daughters. Anna, the eldest, was often seen lingering at the edge of town. She never spoke, never smiled. She simply stood and stared, her blue eyes locked on passers-by until they turned away. Some swore they felt cold after her gaze fell on them, as though she had drained the warmth from their bones. Margaret, the middle child, was spotted more than once at the riverbank, crouched low and tossing small bones into the water. No one knew where she had gotten them, though more than one farmer noticed missing chickens, missing cats, missing strays. She never reacted when people saw her. She only stared back with that same unblinking calm until they hurried away. And little Eliza, the youngest, was perhaps the strangest of all. Children swore they saw her in the orchard, her lips moving as though whispering secrets to the trees. No sound came out, yet the branches seemed to sway more violently when she spoke, as though listening. One woman even claimed she saw the youngest girl place her hand against the trunk of an apple tree, and the bark rippled under her palm, like water disturbed by a stone. But no one dared to confront them. And so the whispers grew, but no action was taken. Then, one morning, the Whitaker home fell silent. Anna, the eldest daughter, was gone. Her bed was found empty, her covers untouched, her window left wide open to the night air. No footprints marked the dirt outside. No one had heard a struggle. No one had seen her leave. When the minister gently asked Mr. Whitaker about his daughter, the man's answer was cold and simple. "Anna has gone to visit distant relatives," he said. "She will return when she is ready." But there were no relatives. Not in Virginia, not anywhere nearby. And no carriage had been seen leaving the property. Still, no one in Hollow Creek pressed further. Perhaps they were afraid of angering the family. Perhaps they were afraid of the truth they might uncover. Whatever the reason, they let the matter rest. But unease deepened. For if one daughter could vanish without a trace, what of the others? The orchard stood silent behind the Whitaker home, the branches heavy with apples redder than ever. The townsfolk avoided looking too closely, but in the dark, some swore they saw movement between the trees. A flicker of white dress, a pale hand brushing the leaves, a face staring back through the branches. And the fear in Hollow Creek grew heavier still. After Anna vanished, Hollow Creek became a different town. It wasn't just the whispers in the marketplace or the way mothers called their children inside earlier than before. It was the way silence fell whenever the Whitakers passed. The way doors shut softly as the family walked down the road. It was as though Anna's absence had turned the air itself into something heavy and unbreathable. But the strangest thing was how the Whitakers carried themselves. Mr. Whitaker remained the same, stern, rigid, a figure carved from stone. Mrs. Whitaker grew even quieter, her face pale as parchment, her lips tight as though sealed with wax. and the remaining daughters, Margaret and Eliza, moved about as though nothing had changed, as though Anna had never existed. When people spoke of the daughters now, it was with a fear that seemed to coil tighter with each passing week. Margaret, at 14, had taken on an unsettling presence. She walked the orchard rows at dusk, her pale hands brushing the branches as though in communion with the trees. More than one neighbor swore they saw her pluck apples, not to eat them, but to bury them deep into the soil. And sometimes, they claimed, she buried more than apples. One farmer whispered that he saw her dig with her bare hands, pulling something small and limp from the pocket of her dress, a rabbit, blooded and still, and tucking it beneath the roots of the tree as though feeding it to the land. Eliza, at 12, was quieter but no less disturbing. She was often seen standing alone at the river, her lips moving as though speaking to someone unseen. Her reflection in the water seemed wrong to those who watched, delayed, or smiling when her face was not. A seamstress, passing by one morning, swore she heard Eliza humming, but the voice carried not as one voice, but many, led like a choir echoing across the water. Of course, such things could be explained away as tricks of the mind. Fear makes the eyes see shadows where there are none. But in Hollow Creek, no one trusted their senses anymore. Life in the town continued in its quiet, rural rhythm. Horses clattered along the dirt roads. The chapel bell rang on Sundays. The blacksmith hammered his iron, and the mill turned steadily with the flow of the creek. But beneath it all was unease. Every time the Whitaker daughters appeared, conversations faltered. One afternoon, Margaret and Eliza came into town together. They walked in perfect step, carrying a small basket of cloth, perhaps for the seamstress. Their hair was neatly braided, their white dresses spotless. And yet, something about them unsettled every soul they passed. The butcher claimed their eyes were too sharp, too knowing. The baker swore their lips curled into faint smiles when they saw his hands tremble. And old Mrs. Talbot, the midwife, said that when she looked into Eliza's eyes, she felt as though a hand had reached inside her chest and squeezed her heart. The daughters said nothing. They conducted their errand in silence, their movements perfectly mirrored, as though one was the shadow of the other. When they left, the townsfolk felt as though the air had cleared, as though a storm had passed overhead. But the storm was only beginning. That winter was bitterly cold. Snow lay thick across the fields, and smoke rose constantly from the chimneys of Hollow Creek. Families huddled close around their fires. But the Whitaker orchard stood strangely untouched. Neighbors noticed that while the snow blanketed every field and hill, the apple trees remained visible, their branches still heavy with fruit that gleamed unnaturally red against the white landscape. Some claimed to see figures moving between the trees at night, though no footprints ever marked the snow. Margaret was often spotted during those long nights, lantern in hand, walking slowly between the trees. Sometimes Eliza followed. Sometimes she did not. But always, there was a sense that something walked with them, unseen, keeping pace in the shadows. One night, a man named Henry Caldwell decided he would follow. Henry was a hunter, proud and stubborn, the kind who scoffed at tales of curses and ghosts. He told his brother he would uncover the Whitaker secrets and put an end to the town's fay. He was never seen again. His brother later found his footprints in the snow, leading into the orchard. They went on for several rows and then stopped. No sign of struggle, no broken branches, just an abrupt end, as though Henry had vanished into the air. The Whitaker daughters were seen in town the next day. Their white dresses were clean, their faces expressionless. Eliza held a small bird in her hands, alive but trembling. She stroked it absently as though soothing it. When she let it go, the bird flew high into the sky, only to fall lifeless seconds later, its wings snapping shut mid-flight. No one dared speak of it. By spring, Hollow Creek was a town ruled by fear. Mothers warned their children never to stray near the Whitaker land. Men who once prided themselves on bravery avoided walking alone at night. The orchard loomed over the town like a black stain, its branches whispering secrets no one wanted to hear. And still, the daughters grew stranger. Margaret was seen more often in the church graveyard, standing among the stones, her fingers tracing names carved into the weathered granite. One widow swore she saw the girl lying flat across a grave, her ear pressed to the earth as though listening for something below. Eliza began appearing in dreams. At least, that's what people claimed. Farmers woke in the night, drenched in sweat, certain they had seen her standing at the foot of their beds. Women described hearing her voice in their ears, whispering names, sometimes their children's names, sometimes their own. The minister himself, a stern man unshaken by superstition, confessed one Sunday that he had dreamed of Eliza standing in the pulpit, her hands folded, her eyes shining bright, while the congregation sat in silence, their faces pale and lifeless. But when he awoke, the church was empty, and the bells tolled in the distance. The town grew desperate for answers. Some demanded the Whitakers be confronted. Others argued that leaving them alone was safest. But no one acted. Fear held them back. Fear of what they might uncover. And then, Margaret disappeared. It was nearly a year to the day since Anna had gone. Margaret's bed was found empty, her window wide open, the curtains fluttering in the night wind. No footprints. No note. No sign of where she had gone. Mr. Whitaker gave the same cold explanation. She has gone to visit family. But the people of Hollow Creek knew better. 2 daughters gone. 1 remained. And the orchard behind the Whitaker home grew thicker, its branches twisting darker, its apples redder still. The whispers in town grew louder. What is happening to the Whitaker daughters? And more importantly, who, or what, is taking them? The morning after Margaret's disappearance, Hollow Creek awoke with a heaviness that clung to every breath. Snowmelt had swollen the river, and its dark waters carved a restless path through the valley, carrying with it the whispers of the town. The news had traveled quickly. Another Whitaker girl was gone. Anna first, and now Margaret. That left only Eliza. And Eliza was changing. When townsfolk passed the Whitaker house, they noticed the curtains never parted anymore. Smoke still rose from the chimney, so they knew the family remained inside. But gone were the ordinary sounds of life. No sweeping of the porch, no children's laughter, no chatter of a mother hanging laundry. Instead, they heard only one sound. Singing. A single voice, high and thin, drifting from an upstairs window. Eliza. She sang at odd hours, dawn, midnight, even during storms when thunder shook the valley. Sometimes the song was sweet, almost like a lullaby. But often it was discordant, a twisting melody that made listeners' stomachs knot. Some claimed the tune was not meant for human ears at all. One evening, the blacksmith's apprentice swore he heard more than one voice joining Eliza's. He said it was as though her sisters sang with her, their tones faint and lead, like echoes carried through water. He left town the next day. Life in Hollow Creek grew darker still. Cattle began dying without cause. Milk curdled within hours of milking. The air near the Whitaker orchard smelled faintly of rot, even when the breeze blew clean from the hills. And always, the river swelled with an unnatural force. Fishermen avoided it, though fish were seen in abundance, their silver bodies flashing beneath the surface. Those who did cast their nets swore the fish were wrong, eyes too wide, scales bruised black, mouths opening and closing soundlessly as though trying to speak. And more than once, children wandering too close to the water reported seeing faces beneath the rippling surface. Pale, familiar faces. Anna. Margaret. Smiling. Beckoning. The adults told themselves it was nonsense. Dreams. Tricks of sunlight. But their hearts betrayed them. They knew the river was keeping secrets. Eliza, meanwhile, had grown bolder. She was often seen by the water, her white dress trailing in the mud, her bare feet sinking into the bank. She would stand for hours, unmoving, staring into the current as though listening. Sometimes her lips moved. Sometimes her hands swayed gently, mimicking the flow of the river. One farmer swore he saw her wade knee-deep into the water, her dress clinging to her legs, her hair fanning across the surface. She held her arms wide, as though embracing something unseen. When the farmer called out to her, she turned slowly. Her eyes, he said, were black as the river. He never called out again. The minister of Hollow Creek, Reverend Silas Morton, decided he could stay silent no longer. He was a man of iron faith, one who had buried more than his share of children, but he had never seen such darkness spread through a community. He began to preach against the Whitakers. On Sundays, his voice thundered through the chapel, echoing against the wooden beams. He spoke of curses, of bloodlines tainted with sin. He warned that the orchard was not of God, that the river carried voices from the depths of hell itself. He urged the townsfolk to turn away from the Whitakers and cleanse Hollow Creek of their evil. But the Whitakers did not attend church anymore, and some whispered that Reverend Morton's sermons seemed almost too fearful, as though he were less preaching to the people and more trying to convince himself. On the third Sunday after Margaret's disappearance, he claimed Eliza had stood in the church doorway as he spoke. She had not moved. She had not spoken. She had simply watched. And when he faltered in his sermon, losing his place, she smiled. The town began to divide. Some, like the Reverend, called for action. They argued that the Whitakers must be cast out, their orchard burned, their home torn down. Others believed this would only provoke something far worse. Better, they said, to let the Whitakers be. Better to let the darkness remain contained. But fear does not remain contained for long. Strange disappearances began outside the Whitaker family. A boy named Thomas Heller vanished while fetching water from the river. His bucket was found overturned on the bank, his footprints leading into the shallows, and stopping. 2 girls, sisters, failed to return from berry picking near the orchard. Their baskets were discovered, filled with berries darkened as though soaked in blood. And always, in the days following, Eliza was seen walking near the water, her lips curved in that faint, unreadable smile. The midwife, Mrs. Talbot, was the first to confront her. It was late afternoon, and Eliza stood once again by the river, her dress rippling in the wind. Mrs. Talbot, a stern woman who had delivered nearly every child in Hollow Creek, marched straight to her, her shawl clutched tight against the cold. "What are you doing here, child?" she demanded. Eliza did not answer. "Your sisters are gone, and here you stand by this cursed water. What do you see in it? What holds you so?" Slowly, Eliza turned. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, but her lips curved into something between a smile and a snay. "They are not gone," she whispered. Mrs. Talbot's skin crawled. "What do you mean?" "They are waiting." Her gaze shifted to the river, where the current broke against the rocks. "Waiting for me." And before the midwife could speak again, Eliza stepped deeper into the water until it lapped at her waist. She closed her eyes, lifted her arms, and whispered a string of words Mrs. Talbot did not recognize, words that did not belong to any prayer or hymn. The river churned violently around her, waves rising against the current. The midwife stumbled back, her shawl slipping from her shoulders, her heart hammering as though she had seen something forbidden. When she looked again, Eliza stood perfectly still, the water calm once more, her eyes black as the depths below. Mrs. Talbot fled, and she never spoke directly to the girl again. By midsummer, Hollow Creek no longer felt like a town, but a place besieged. Children were kept indoors. Doors were locked at sundown. Men carried rifles not for wolves, but for shadows. The orchard loomed ever darker, the river ran ever swifter, and at the heart of it all stood the lost Whitaker daughter, Eliza, only 12 years old. And yet she walked with the bearing of something ageless, something patient, something hungry. And though the townsfolk feared her, they could not look away. For each time they saw her pale figure by the river, a terrible truth pressed heavier on their souls. Whatever had taken Anna, whatever had taken Margaret, it had not finished yet, and Eliza was no longer resisting it. The summer of 1822 lay heavy over Hollow Creek. The fields baked under a relentless sun, yet the air seemed unnaturally damp, as though the river's breath had spread across the land. Flies swarmed thicker than ever, horses grew skittish at night, and the dogs, those loyal guardians, howled ceaselessly at the orchard, their cries echoing down the valley. Everyone agreed, the town was cursed, and at the center of it, still, was the Whitaker home. The lost daughter, Eliza, was no longer a child in the townspeople's eyes. At 12, she should have been shy, playful, and innocent. Instead, she moved through Hollow Creek with a presence that unsettled even grown men. Her steps were slow and deliberate, her pale hands often clasped before her as if in prayer, but her lips never moved in worship. Her eyes seemed too dark, too deep, as though they drank in the world rather than reflected it. And worst of all, she watched. She watched from the orchard's edge as children dared each other to run past the gate. She watched from the upstairs window as neighbors tried to pass quickly on the road. She watched from the riverbank, her skirts dragging in the mud, her face tilted upward as if speaking to something unseen. Eliza was always watching. On the 1st of August, another child disappeared. This time it was young Sarah Clemens, the butcher's daughter. She had been playing near her father's shop, chasing a stray chicken down the lane. She was gone within minutes. Her bonnet was found in the dirt. Nothing more. The town searched frantically. Men waded waist-deep into the river, dragging hooks through the current. Women combed the orchard's edges with lanterns, their hands trembling as they lifted branches heavy with rotting fruit. But Sarah was gone. The Reverend declared it proof. Proof that the Whitakers' darkness had spread beyond their own blood. "They are stealing your children now," he thundered in the chapel. "If you do not act, Hollow Creek will be emptied, one child at a time, until only shadows remain." The mothers wept. The fathers gripped their rifles. And still, Eliza was seen standing by the river, her face lifted to the water, her lips murmuring words the wind carried away. That night, a group of men gathered in secret at the tavern. The candles burned low, the ale went untouched. These were not men of superstition. They were farmers, blacksmiths, hunters. Men whose hands were hardened by work, not weakened by fear. Yet their eyes betrayed them. They spoke of the orchard, of the foul smell that clung to its soil, of the way the ground sometimes seemed freshly disturbed even when no plow had touched it. They spoke of Eliza's eyes, her strange singing, the way the river seemed to move with her steps. Finally, one man, the blacksmith, Elias Ward, slammed his fist against the table. "Enough. If the Reverend is right, then waiting will doom us all. The Whitakers have taken our children. We'll take them back, or bury them trying." The men agreed. By dawn, they would march to the Whitaker home. But Hollow Creek was not destined to wait until dawn. At midnight, the town was shaken by screams. They came from the orchard. Men rushed from their homes, rifles in hand, lanterns swinging wildly. Women clutched their children, pressing them against their skirts. The screams rose higher, sharper, until suddenly they cut off. The orchard fell silent. Only the wind moved then, rustling through the trees. The men hesitated at its edge, their lanterns casting trembling circles of light. The smell struck them first, sour, rancid, like fruit left too long in the sun. Beneath it lingered something far worse, the copper tang of blood. They stepped forward, the orchard grass crunching beneath their boots. Branches clawed at their sleeves. The lanterns swayed. And then, at the far side of the orchard, they saw her, Eliza. Her white dress glowed pale in the lantern light. Her hair hung loose about her shoulders, damp as though she had stepped from the river. In her hand, she clutched something small, something limp. A doll. It was Sarah Clemens's doll. The butcher fell to his knees with a cry. The other men raised their rifles, voices breaking with rage and terror. "What have you done with her?" Elias Ward shouted. Eliza tilted her head. Slowly, she lifted the doll and pressed it to her cheek. Then, in a voice soft as falling water, she answered, "She is with Anna. And Margaret. Safe." The men surged forward, but the ground betrayed them. The earth beneath the orchard shifted suddenly, sinking, swallowing their steps. Roots twisted upward, snaring boots, scraping skin. Lanterns fell and sputtered out, plunging the orchard into darkness. And through it all, Eliza laughed. It was not the laugh of a child. It was the laugh of something old. Something that had waited patiently, hidden in soil and water, until the right bloodline carried it forward. The men staggered back, gasping for air, clawing free of the roots. When they stumbled from the orchard, pale and blooded, their rifles were gone. Their courage was gone. And Sarah Clemens was still gone. The next morning, Hollow Creek was no longer divided. Everyone knew the Whitakers were not merely cursed. They were chosen. And Eliza Whitaker was no longer just the lost daughter. She was becoming the heart of it all. The Reverend declared a holy fast. The blacksmith boarded his windows. The butcher dug an empty grave for his daughter, though his hands shook too hard to finish. But none of it mattered, because every night thereafter, more screams were heard near the river. Sometimes they belonged to children, sometimes to animals. Sometimes, chillingly, they sounded like voices the town already knew were lost. Anna, Margaret, Sarah. Their cries drifted across Hollow Creek, carried on the current, fading into laughter. And each time, Eliza could be seen at dawn, her dress wet, her hands stained with mud, her smile growing wider. The orchard had always been Hollow Creek's pride. In the spring, its blossoms fell like snow. In the summer, its branches bent heavy with apples so red and full they looked like drops of blood against the green leaves. In the fall, the fruit sweetened the town's tables, and in winter, the orchard stood silent and skeletal, a boneyard of trees waiting for spring's touch. But by August of 1822, no one in Hollow Creek saw beauty in those trees. Their trunks were gnarled and twisted, bark splitting as though something pressed from within. Their branches sagged with fruit too ripe, flesh splitting open to reveal cause blackened with rot. The smell clung to the valley, fermented sweetness, sour and choking. And worst of all was the ground. The soil of the Whitaker orchard was too soft, too damp. It sucked at boots when anyone dared step within, as though the earth itself had been fed with more than water and sun. It was Elias Ward, the blacksmith, who finally gathered the courage to speak aloud what many had already whispered. "There are graves beneath those trees," he said one night in the tavern, his voice low. "That's why the ground moves. That's why the fruit rots. The Whitakers are feeding the orchard with flesh." The men around him shifted uneasily, but none denied it. The butcher, gaunt from grief, gripped his mug until his knuckles whitened. The reverend closed his eyes, muttering prayers under his breath. They decided, quietly, secretly, that they would dig. Not in the day, when Eliza might be watching, but under the cover of darkness. They would enter the orchard and see for themselves what the Whitakers had buried. The night chosen was moonless. Clouds smothered the stars, and the lanterns the men carried seemed to illuminate little more than trembling circles of earth. Elias Ward led them, spade slung over his shoulder, jaw clenched tight. Behind him came the butcher, 2 farmers, and the reverend, each man carrying tools and fear in equal measure. The orchard loomed before them, its trees whispering in the wind. The smell grew stronger with every step, until their stomachs twisted. They set to digging. The earth yielded too easily, crumbling away as though it had been disturbed many times before. Their shovels struck roots, thick, black, pulsing faintly beneath the soil. Some roots bled when cut, oozing sap the color of rust. The butcher gagged, retching into the grass. Still, they dug. And then the reverend's spade struck something solid. It was a child's shoe. The leather was worn, the laces knotted tight, the fabric stiff with age. But it was not alone. Beneath it lay bone. Small bones, white and fragile, pressed together as though in haste. A skull, no larger than an apple, tumbled free, jaw hanging open in silent scream. The men froze. Their lanterns flickered as though the orchard itself exhaled. "There are more," Elias whispered, his voice raw. "God help us, there are more." They dug again, more frantically this time. Everywhere their spades pierced, they found remnants, scraps of fabric, strands of hair, tiny fingers curled in earth. Some graves were shallow, others deep, but all were wrong. And none belonged only to the Whitaker daughters. The bones stretched back further, decades further. The orchard was a graveyard. The reverend fell to his knees, clutching his Bible to his chest. "It is unholy," he gasped. "A covenant with death itself. This land is cursed, and the Whitakers are its keepers." As if in answer, the ground beneath them shifted. The roots writhed, curling around their ankles, pressing against their boots. The earth seemed to breathe, inhaling and exhaling with a rhythm that matched no wind. From the trees above, apples began to fall one by one, thudding against the soil, splitting open to reveal seeds slick with blood. The butcher cried out, flinging down his spade. "We have to burn it. Burn the orchard to ash." Elias gripped his arm, steadying him. "Not yet. If we burn it now, whatever lives in this ground will rise. We need to know what we're fighting." The reverend shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "You do not fight the devil, Elias. You cast him out, or you perish." A sound cut through their argument. Laughter. High, soft, and chilling. The men turned, lanterns swinging wildly. At the far end of the orchard, half hidden in the shadows of the trees, stood Eliza. Her white dress glowed faintly, her hair wild around her face. She watched them with wide, dark eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though her voice carried across the orchard as if spoken into each of their ears. The butcher stepped forward, rage boiling through his grief. Where is Sarah? Where are the others? Eliza tilted her head, almost pitying him. They are part of the orchard now. They are safe. Safe, the man roared, his voice breaking. You buried them like animals. Eliza's smile widened. They wanted to stay. The ground split beneath the men's feet. Roots surged upward, thick as serpents, curling around shovels and legs. One lantern fell, shattering, its flame racing across the dry grass. The men shouted, stumbling backward, tearing free from the writhing orchard. The reverend screamed for God's mercy. The butcher swung his spade wildly, hacking at roots that bled dark sap. Elias dragged him back, his own arms torn with scratches. Through it all, Eliza stood unmoving, her eyes glimmering in the flickering light. The fire spread quickly, licking at the low branches. But the orchard did not burn. The flames sputtered and died, smoke curling into the air, leaving the trees unscathed. The men fled, stumbling from the orchard, their lanterns gone, their courage shattered. Behind them, Eliza's laughter followed, soft and terrible. By dawn, Hollow Creek knew the truth. The orchard was no longer theirs. It belonged to the dead, and the Whitakers were its keepers.